Hi, it's Joanne Moffett, and I'm here today to talk with you about whole brain teaching and activities to facilitate engagement and learning. So here we go. Our goals, we're going to look at the brain, vocabulary and functions of the brain. We're going to talk about what whole brain teaching is. We're going to look at mindsets, activities to build brain capacity, and being a nurturing demander. So when we first look at the brain, there are three areas: the lower brain, which is the reptilian or lizard brain. That's the instinctual part of our brain. The limbic brain, which is the emotional or feeling midbrain area, and then the neocortex, also known as the prefrontal cortex. So with the reptilian region of the brain, the lizard brain, this, as you saw, was the brain stem. So if we just go back here, so this is the brain stem right in here. And it's also the cerebellum. So this is the part of our brain that if we're sleeping and we smell smoke or we hear noises, we wake up. Okay, it's a reaction, an automatic reaction. The lizard brain or the reptilian brain connects to the spinal cord, and it controls those automatic functions that we need to survive. It's our basic survival. It's our breathing, the heartbeat, pumping our blood to all parts of our body, the blood pressure, the cerebellum, the balance, and our body temperature. This reptilian region also contains the reticular activating system, also known as the RAS, and that's responsible for alertness and attention. So it's what will direct our kids' attentions to the beginning of a task. So that reticular activating system has to be activated in order to get kids' attention. Ready to learn. The next region is the limbic region, and this is our emotional brain. It's linking emotion, behavior, and thinking all together. It's this part of our brain that is where we are learning from experiences, we're managing our emotions, and we're remembering. So the part of our brain in here, in this limbic region, called the thalamus, is connecting the information from the reticular activating system that we just mentioned before to where it needs to go. So it's like a director of, that reticular activating system that's getting engaged and, is being grabbed by some attention, is then channeling that signal where it needs to go in the brain. So it could go to the hippocampus, which is the memory area. It's the memory system. So it's short-term memory up to 20 minutes, and then working memory, connecting new and old knowledge together. Long-term memory, background knowledge, is also here in the hippocampus. Active learning takes place when the hippocampus is engaged. So again, if you have the reticular activating system activated, going to the thalamus, and then going to the hippocampus, we're good, we're learning. However, if you have that reticular activating system grabbed and it's perceived as a alert or alarm, Then we're talking about the amygdala. The amygdala is that police officer of the brain. Amygdala hijack happens when danger is perceived. That's an important concept. Danger is perceived, and fight, flight, and freeze are enacted. Remember those. We've talked about those in other trainings. So if that happens, then cortisol is released. And cortisol is a stress hormone, a stress chemical. So no learning will take place during this because there's a heightened state, and information cannot get to the hippocampus. Okay, it's stuck with the amygdala, and adrenaline and cortisol are released. So the next piece of this is the neocortex region, and this is the executive function command center of the brain. This region, the upper brain, oversees thinking and manages working memory. So this is your prefrontal cortex, the wise leader of the brain. It's here that brain power and intellectual capacity for more learning can be built. It's kind of like building, interconnecting Legos. It just keeps going and going. And it's in this area that there's the controls for everyday life that's needed, not just in a classroom, but throughout the day for everybody, for all of us. This is our conscious decision making, those executive functionings of organizing and analyzing, managing ourselves, focusing, and problem solving. Another key piece in brain vocabulary is this concept of neuroplasticity, and it's the response to learning capacity. We have in our brains neurons, and they are the building blocks, and they carry the information into the brain, and it's the neurons that are the building blocks, and they're the gray matter over here on the right, the gray matter of the brain. And because of learning, the very cool thing is that gray matter is not fixed. It grows. So we have such a powerful tool as educators, as people involved in our students' lives, in that we're able to influence the rewiring of the brain of so many of our students. Understanding about the nervous system is key in understanding the brain. So the first is the autonomic nervous system, which includes the parasympathetic nerve, the sympathetic nerve, and the polyvagal nerve. Parasympathetic is the rest and digest part of our nervous system. That is the part of us that is focusing on meeting the need for relaxation and well-being, getting our needs met. When we're hungry, we eat. When we're tired, we sleep. It's managing that steady heartbeat, breathing. And if we're doing, getting our needs met and doing what our body needs it to do, dopamine is released. And dopamine is also that chemical that is released when learning. So dopamine is a chemical that's really influential in helping us just be alert and calm and ready to learn. Now, the sympathetic nerve is the red alert. That's that, fight, flight, freeze. We need to get some adrenaline going because you need to move. You need to get out of here. This is really important. This is an unsafe situation. and also cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So they're the chemicals that are needed to flight, and they're dealing with stress. Okay, it's like a survival in a situation. And then the polyvagal nerve is a really important one, and that is the social engagement. We're social beings, and when we're in a situation with others and it's comfortable and safe, we're releasing the oxytocin, which is also known as a cuddle hormone. Now, oxytocin coupled with dopamine going up to the prefrontal cortex and also to the limbic system with that thalamus region is enabling us to learn. So isn't that great? So we really need to be mindful that we need to have the oxytocin level with the polyvagal nervous system. We need to have the dopamine, and we need both of those in the parasympathetic to be activated and working in order for us to be engaging our kids, even in that lower brain level, and grabbing them for learning with the reticular activating system, and then moving into learning. So what's first in all this and all these words and all this stuff, this jargon? So what's first is comfort. So let's get into whole brain teaching. We're going to talk about comfort. We're going to talk about cooperative learning, direct instruction, and making connections. So comfort, safety first. We need to create spaces for our kids, for our students, that make them feel safe. Since the amygdala stays on alert, when instructions are given, we need to be mindful of what students may perceive as threatening. Okay? And that's part of that. We want to connect with them before we direct them. So connecting is really important in establishing comfort. Okay? The hippocampus is engaged as the limbic emotional brain is calm. Now remember, the hippocampus is where all that memory is, right? So if a student is being yelled at, and they're being yelled at, what's the rule about this, right? They're being yelled at, their amygdala may go into a fight, flight, or freeze state, and the information, the thalamus may not get the information then over to the hippocampus, which is where memory is, and they may not be able to say or even remember what the rule is, right? So we need to keep everybody calm. Doesn't mean you can't redirect them, but it means we have to stay calm and be what we're going to call later a nurturing demander. So the other piece is recognizing the power of cultural perspectives. So in order to provide comfort, we really have to understand the importance and the value with cultures. Some cultures, kids don't do eye contact, right? Some cultures, kids don't learn well with just sitting. They learn better, for example, with oral storytelling versus, reading a paragraph about something. So we also need to be aware of implicit bias that we may have, like feeling, and how that could affect our expectations for kids. So implicit bias meaning like you don't think a student can learn as well because of their background or their socioeconomic status or their culture, or what they look like. So, I think back to, I don't know if you know the movie Breakfast Club, but It was out a long time ago, but there's a bunch of kids that have to do detention on a Saturday school, and this one kid was really dark in his dress, wearing a trench coat and all black and blah blah blah, and just hair in his eyes. He ends up, nobody thought, like, there was implicit bias that he wasn't capable of, or smart. And he, in fact, was very smart and very capable. So that's basically what that's about. And also being aware of indirect directives. So when we want to establish safety in a classroom, we want to make sure, or safety in any kind of setting, that we're with our kids, on a bus, wherever. We really want to be careful that we're saying what we mean. So an example of that could be something like, do you want to take your seat? And the kid might say, no, I don't want to take my seat. Or he may be smaller, or she may be smaller and won't say it all. But when you're asking the question, do you want to? They may answer it directly, no, I don't want to. So that then can be confusing and create a misunderstanding of what's being wanted. So you need to say what you want and say exactly what it is you want to happen. So instead of saying, do you want to take your seat? You would say, it's time to sit. We need to be in our seats now. You want to say what's needed and what the rule is. The big piece of cultural perspectives is really widening our lens. What can we do in our rooms, in our settings, even on our buses, to make kids feel more comfortable? So the next piece of this is, we've talked about comfort. Now we're going to talk about cooperative learning with whole brain teaching. And cooperative learning is really a wonderful, wonderful way to get that oxytocin released and social engagement. We're all, as I said earlier, social beings. We need connections. So we know that building positive relationships in the classroom between you and the kids is important in establishing comfort, but it's also important to build those relationships among the students. So we need to build them, and no matter what setting we're in, we need to build them, whether it's the lunchroom, the school bus, playground. They need positive relationships. Okay. And when there's positive relationships, again, we're releasing that oxytocin, and then it's that oxytocin is going to that upper brain, that executive functioning of the PFC, prefrontal cortex, and then that prefrontal cortex can access the information that's come in through the hippocampus so that they can be learning. So do you see how cooperative learning isn't something that just happens? You have to do a lot of activity to get that going. Sometimes that is, it creates a positive interdependence with perhaps different roles that kids have where they are in their setting. They look forward to certain, relationships within a classroom or a setting. Face-to-face interactions are really wonderful for releasing the oxytocin that's needed. Having in classrooms project learning. So if there's a group activity or a group process going on, there's accountability and personal responsibility to the group. So if some of you are working in small groups already, you have the ideal platform for establishing this cooperative learning, establishing some accountability within the group. There could even be different roles that the group has. Somebody being a note taker, somebody being responsible for the supplies, somebody else being responsible for the attendance. So giving that accountability gives a sense of purpose as well for the students. And then we look at social interaction as how important it is with making meaning with learning. It establishes opportunities for students to learn from their more skilled peers, but also just all kids learn differently. We have multiple intelligences. So some kids may be more theatrical, and some kids may be just more better with facts. You combine those things, and wow, kids can really learn from each other. I recently read a book, and it was historical fiction, and it was just a wonderful book. But it was the Book of Lost Friends, and taking place. Part of it took place in the late 1980s, a teacher teaching in Louisiana in a very rural area in a school that didn't have good budget, and kind of the community overlying message to the school was, we gave up on you. So the cooperative learning that took place was project based, where kids really got into it. Was their idea. Instead of reading a book, Animal Farm, they researched people of history in their community, and then dressed up as them and put on a performance about what the people that went through that were slaves in that area. Anyway, my point is that when there's cooperative learning opportunities, there's so much more meaning that's made from the learning. So, direct instruction. We have to do direct instruction always, but part of whole brain teaching is doing the grabber, right? Having active engagement by grabbing that reticular activating system in a way that will make the student, the brain, hooked in and want to learn. So that lower brain, that reticular activating system, is engaged with a grabber. I've given you two here that are a harmonica and chimes. Now, the other you could use, I'm going to share some more in a little bit, like repeated statements, call and response, use of props. Having something that's routine is good, but also changing it up a little bit, but always having the grabber is good. Now, I want to just make mention here for a second. Many people think about clapping, right, as a way of activating attention, the reticular activating system. I want you to know that studies have been done, and the amygdala is what often is activated when you clap, because of loud noise, and it can signal, especially for some of our trauma kids, a red alert response. So where it may look like a student is paying attention, they're really in a frozen state. Or you may see some kids, when you do you may see some kids go under their desk, or check out. So just keep that in mind. So whole brain teaching, this last part that I want to talk about is making connections, and connections to background existing knowledge is really a great thing, because again, we're we're filing this new information in the hippocampus, but it really helps learning stick when they can file it in a file, right, with something that's familiar. So new information is connected to existing content in the student's world. So if there's an interest a student has, like, for example, I put down cars, motors. So when I would teach about energy in our body and how we can go slow like a car that's going uphill and running out of gas, kids can relate to that, right? Or we can drive just right, go in the speed limit on the freeway, and then my energy's good and I'm in the calm zone, my green zone. Or yellow, oh, I'm going a little bit, I'm jumbly, I'm maybe not steering so good because I'm feeling excited or just really silly. Or zoom, really fast, I'm zooming because I'm so mad and I just want to drive so fast. So having that stick is because in their hippocampus, they're connecting it to pre-existing knowledge that they have about cars and motors. Now, it could be dinosaurs that you're comparing things to, or animals, or sports, something in a family's culture. And, just as I shared with you about a book I read before when we were talking about instruction, right? I was doing a comparing to a text I read. And we have written stuff when we're making connections. It could be written, like text to ourselves. When we're reading something, we might relate it to something in our own lives, or text something in the world that we're aware of, or something that we've previously read, text to text. And then there's auditory, right? There's written, auditory. So when we hear something, we might connect it to something within ourselves, or in our family, or in our culture, or in our world. So whole brain teaching is acknowledging those connections. Whole brain teaching is pausing and digesting and talking about what those connections might be, helping kids see them, going slow and helping them see them. So next I'm going to talk about mindsets, and I love this word, neuroplasticity. Well, that's really about believing in the growth of that gray matter, that those neurons really, really, really are able to make new information expand our brains. We have such power to grow. And it's that shift from a fixed to a growth mindset. Fixed mindset, we've talked about before, believes, can't change, can't learn this. Growth mindset, it's hard. I don't know it, but I'll get there. It's hard, but I'm doing it. I'm doing it a little at a time. So empathy is at the core, we know, of building relationships. And in order to have this neuroplasticity, we have to have trust and safety, because that's going to increase a kid's ability to take some risks and make mistakes in their learning. We have to be able to acknowledge that mistakes are good, because from mistakes we learn and grow. Right? But that's not going to happen unless there's empathy. And our role, no matter who you are in the school system, is to cheer on effort. You're going to acknowledge any effort that you see. And of course, you're going to acknowledge any progress too. And you're going to be the reflector of that progress. Kids often don't see their progress. They don't focus on what they're doing well. Rather, they'll focus on what they can't do. So you're their ally, and you're the one that's saying, I noticed that you were doing this. Remember, you weren't able to do that, and now you are? I wonder where you're going to end up going. Creativity is really key with enhancing this growth mindset and this whole neuroplasticity. Activating the limbic system, remember that emotional part, through the use of other mediums like art and poetry, music, that allows kids to connect emotion and thinking. And that really helps with keeping everything calm and then growing. There's prefrontal cortex exercises that we do, and you do them without even thinking. You're teaching critical thinking skills and decision making all the time. You ask kids to explain their thinking. So it could be something as simple with littles as saying, because I see the sky is gray, then I know it's going to rain later, right? It could be, because I planted a seed in the dirt and watered it, then I know it's going to grow into a plant. Okay. And then asking those open-ended questions as opposed to yes and no answer type questions. So asking them to explain their thinking. What made you do it this way? Okay. Asking them to be looking at what they're working on and give more details. Tell me what this is for, having checklists to help kids with decision making is helpful sometimes. Just with those kinds of questions that I just said. So, with those why are you doing it this way? Okay. And then it's always very good to provide opportunities for debriefing about the learning that's taken place. And that is also strengthening the prefrontal cortex. This is artwork by Leonardo da Vinci. And the mindset here is balance. So we have the mindset of neuroplasticity and the mindset of balance. We have a left side of our brain and the right side of our brain. The left side of our brain is the logical part. The right, the more emotional part. So we want to encourage that right artsy emotional side and the left linear thinking side. So we want to encourage science, art, logic, and imagination. Leonardo da Vinci is a great example of someone who excelled at both, at art and math and science. And we can be encouraging our students to be great at both as well. This mindset, we've talked about balance. We've talked about neuroplasticity. Now we're going to talk about the mindset of gratitude, compassion, and empathy. So remember, we talked about safety first, right? That unless people feel safe, unless they feel loved and comfort, they're not going to be able to learn. Well, when they're safe, their body's calm, and this reticular activating system is priming the hippocampus, the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex to take in the new learning. The parasympathetic system, the rest and digest that we talked about before, is strengthened as opposed to the sympathetic system of the fight, flight, and freeze. So this is really important with especially kids of trauma. We have the ability to help them strengthen the parasympathetic system. Okay, we have the ability to diminish that fight, flight, freeze response by doing exercises and having mindsets of gratitude and acts of kindness. Through gratitude, compassion, and empathy, what we're seeing is that dopamine and oxytocin are released. Gratitude is thinking about what and who we are thankful for. So modeling that for our kids is great. I'm really thankful that you're here today. I'm really thankful that the sun is shining today. So we're going to try to foster that contentment. And when you do that, that dopamine is going to travel right up to that prefrontal cortex. You're going to see more engaged learners. And, even for us right now, gratitude and acts of kindness during this pandemic, that's what helps many of us, including myself, get through these days. Acts of kindness, concern about the welfare of others, and, that really helps develop our emotional intelligence, and as well as increasing those dopamine levels. So, acts of kindness creates empathy. Understanding feelings of others creates empathy. These are really, really key in your work with kids. You have such power to help them learn about gratitude, compassion, and empathy. And then you're setting the stage for getting them primed to feel safe and learn. Isn't that a great power that you have? We're going to move into activities that build brain capacity. We're going to ignite the brain with a grabber. We talked about this before. This cues that reticular activating system in the reptilian or lizard brain. Use music. We talked about the harmonica. We talked about the chimes. Hand gestures too. You could do some kind of hand gesture or props with a hand gesture. Call and response. So this is a fun one. This is where you can be very creative. We talked about this before a little bit. And when we talked about it, we said, yeah, do it as a routine, but it's okay. That's the consistent part. It's okay to add variety. So when I say class, you say yes. No matter how I say it, you repeat it the same way. Class, and then they'd say class. Class, yes. Class, yes. Class, 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 yes, yes, yes. You could even switch it up. Classity, classity, yesity, yesity. So that class yes exercise is simply a call and response. They're using your word, your tone of voice, and the way you're saying your word. So whether you're saying it loud, class, yes, or soft, class, yes, they're repeating you. And, humor is also really good. Laughter in short doses also helps with oxytocin levels, and that help with people feeling safe and secure and ready to learn. But you don't want it to get too out of control, so it's limited. Activities to build brain capacity. We have the igniter, we have the call and response. Chunk. Use short lessons with checking for understanding. And this is where, remember, 20 minutes, after 20 minutes, kids are checked out. So you want to do some movement breaks. You can do clap 1 time, stomp 2 times, pat head 3 times. You could do air guitar. You could do stretches at your, stand and stretch. So some kind of movement. And the next one is chew. You have to give people, students, an opportunity to chew what they've learned. meaning not like gum, but process the new information. There's all different activities that'll help them process. One is turn and talk, and that also builds that, um, you know, that sense of building community within the classroom as well. And it gives some accountability to each other and makes them feel connected. There's also other two activities. Remember, we want to use the left and the right brain. So the right brain, the more emotional, artsy side of our brain, we can use draw pictures related to the learning. And it could be a cartoon. It could be just a little flip chart of the sequencing of something. You could have kids make flow charts on using flowchart paper on using different kinds of ink. You can use compass points, and this is an activity that I got out of a good book, and I'll talk about books in a minute, Making Thinking Visible. And this is where you can either talk this through in groups, or you can have flowcharts around the room. E, what excites me about this learning. W, what worries you. N, what else do you need to know about this? And S, what's our next steps with this learning? So the compass points of north, south, east, west are meaning different things. You could have them around the room, and kids go around and put sticky notes on these notes. So you can use them different times. And then to make it fun, you could play a game connected to the learning. If you already have a small group that you're doing, this is a great activity to play a game connected to the learning. And finally, activities to build brain capacity. In order to do all of this learning after you've chewed on it, then you have to review it, and you have to apply it in that review. So, there may be a song that you've made about the learning. You may be a rap song with mnemonics of some kind that kids can connect and access. Maybe review it with a project where they've made a newspaper with different articles about their learning. They could have a graphic organizer that describes their topic, and using different inks for the new learning they have each time. They could do things like, I used to think, but now I think. And that could be something that they can either write about or talk about, but have it use those critical thinking skills coupled in there, because I used to think because, now I think because. Connect the new learning to a long-term project. And this is kind of creative and sometimes out of your hands if you're not the actual teacher. But doing things like garden projects, once you've learned about photosynthesis, for example, and or it could be a recycling project. That is a really cool thing, connecting to the community. So it's out of this that kids can really digest what they've learned and store it in that hippocampus with a cathartic event. And finally, your role is key in being, with whole brain teaching, in being a nurturing demander. You're going to be using those positive behavior intervention support strategies of affirming growth mindset. You're going to believe that neuroplasticity is real and happens, that kids' brains grow and they have the capacity to take on new learning. that learning is hard, but you're going to be their ally and remind them how far they've come and where they can go. And it's hard because your brain is growing. When we take in new information, it hurts. Um, it's a pain in the head sometimes. You're going to use PBIS strategies to check your own nonverbals and those positive behavior intervention support strategies of that conscious use of yourself. Remember that your paralanguage, your words, your facial expression, your tone of voice, all has to be in sync. You know, I care about you versus, I care about you, and looking away, right? You want to check your eye contact, that facial expression, tone of voice, posture, your gestures, your timing of your response. Giving your students time for them to answer, right? Is that part of your response too? Timing of your response, being in sync with them, being in sync. And your intensity of your response, and also your bodily movement, being aware of being too far away or even too close to kids. You want to use the PBIS strategy of building rapport. You want to find out about this kid. They're not just a student in a seat. You want to know what their interests are, what they're passionate about outside of school. Maybe you're going to notice who they play with or what they do or what they're carrying or what might be on their backpack. And you'll have something to talk with them about. Take an interest in those other things in their lives and talk with them. I challenge you to 3 minutes, 3 times a week with different students and see what a difference that makes. 3 minutes, 3 times a week with different students. Use that PBIS strategy of 6 to 1, 6 positives to 1 redirection. You want to make sure that, you're acknowledging them. You're going to have to redirect them, okay? They're learning and they're going to mess up and they're sometimes going to bug other kids or they're not going to be focused or something, right? Your job is to really acknowledge what you see that they're doing right and making sure that you're making a deal out of that. That's what will stick with them. You're going to encourage the productive struggle. That's, again, it's coupled with the growth mindset. You want to normalize that this productive struggle, hey, this is a great thing. Because let's celebrate. It's hard. That means our brain is growing. It's making a big deal over the fact that getting in new knowledge is painful because it makes our brain work harder. And that productive struggle is part of that whole process. Being a nurturing demander is being able to connect and redirect, but also be able to have that high personal regard and expectations for all students. You want to be in touch with yourself around, are you cutting anybody slack and why are you doing that? And look at that, chew it up, figure it out. Because for everybody, we want to believe in the power of achievement. And we want to hold everybody to very high expectations, no matter who they are. So that's whole brain teaching. And you have such power you're the primers. You're the ones getting students comfortable, helping them feel safe and ready to learn, getting that reticular activating system primed and ready to go, and helping the limbic system feel good, oxytocin levels released, dopamine going to that, activating the prefrontal cortex, and helping them be so capable. Some resources for you. Daniel Siegel writes about the whole brain, and this is the whole brain child. He also has a workbook, the whole brain child workbook, which is really great. I really love this book, but it's really good for parents especially. So I didn't put that up here. This is just a little poster around the class, and this is from this book, Whole Brain Teaching for Challenging Kids. It's written by Chris Biffle, Biffle. And this is where we say, class, that call and response. They say, yes. And you say, class, yes, yes. That really helps. That's that grabber, helps them be engaged. Culturally responsive teaching in the brain is, I love, a great resource. And See, Think, Wonder is just one of the activities from Making Thinking Visible and How to Promote Engagement, Understanding, and Independence for All Learners by Richard, Church, and Morrison. So that's another resource. Again, thank you all for the work that you do, and be really proud of yourselves for your ability and your power to do this whole brain teaching with our kids.